Welcome, everyone, to the latest Detroit Lions Lone Wolves podcast. Got so much to talk about regarding the Detroit Lions offseason. Christian, we are 1 week away from the Combine. I'll be traveling out to Indianapolis next week to get a sense and have a conversation with Dan Campbell, Brad Holmes, potentially the coordinators. Will be speaking to reporters for the first time, kind of now getting acclimated to their roles. What kind of players do they like? How is this adjustment going to take place? So the offseason rolls on. We're still getting some remnants and comments about the Super Bowl, the Eagles. Really, Christian, it's interesting. The discussion regarding the Lions' competitiveness against the Eagles has taken on a life of its own. You get Amon-Ra St. Brown saying that the healthy Lions team in 2025 going out to Lincoln Financial would potentially have an opportunity to compete and play well. And Darius Slay, a Super Bowl champion, former Detroit Lions player, said, look, the Eagles deserve a lot of respect. And in talking about his own team, this team, he said, look, you can't really discuss where your team is at based on a new season when there's new players and everything like that. And he claps back at Amon-Ra St. Brown, indicates that, hey, look, this Eagles team was top five in a lot of metrics. They were a good football team that was relatively healthy. And I thought the line that he said in his Big Play Slay podcast recap after winning the Super Bowl was he felt the Rams were more competitive than the Lions could be. And, no, and there is a lot of injuries, but he got to see the Rams firsthand. What did you make of Darius Slay? Clapping back a little bit at Amon-Ra St. Brown, who naturally is competitive and feels the Lions could compete with the Eagles.
Yeah, and I can't fault either one of those guys because on one end you have Amon-Ra St. Brown, who believes that the Lions, when fully healthy, would have challenged the Eagles and potentially made the Super Bowl. And then on the other end, you have the guy that won the Super Bowl and the Philadelphia Eagles and Darius Slay. So, I see both sides of that argument, and I think that the Lions, if fully healthy, do compete with the Eagles. I think they had one of the best rosters in the NFL, if not the best roster, before the injuries started to pick away at their depth. And so I think that if everybody's healthy going into the playoffs, guys like Aiden Hutchinson and things of that nature, then yes, the Lions do compete and potentially defeat the Philadelphia Eagles and go to the Super Bowl. But that's just not the way things panned out. And I do think that Darius Slay has a valid argument when he discussed the fact that, yeah, you can beat us next year, but it will not be the same team. And you can't say that you would have beaten us because you didn't. And now we're going to have a different team in 2025 due to free agency and the draft and all the different things that come along with the offseason. So I do think both players are correct in their arguments. And I think that the unfortunate thing for the Lions is, the injuries, yes, they played a factor. But at the end of the day, nobody feels sorry for them and they don't get a pass because they had the injuries. And unfortunately, the 2024 season will just be known as a what if for the Detroit Lions. And hopefully they get better injury luck in 2025 because a lot of that talent is coming back. And you're going to have a really solid roster once again. And the hope is that you don't have to sit back at the end of the year and have these same arguments because you're the ones on top. And so, credit to Darius Slay, he's a Super Bowl champion, and he did show some love to Detroit on that podcast. But I think, unfortunately for the Lions, they'll never get that shot to prove what could have been. And that's just the way the ball bounces in the NFL. So, all you can do if you're a Detroit fan is hope for better luck next year when it comes to injuries and all that.
Yeah, this week, later on in this podcast, the Combine, we'll start looking at just early thoughts about who we should pay attention to. Clearly, it's a deeper defensive, it's a deeper class with the defensive linemen and the offensive linemen. So that's really good in an opportunity to kind of see who can stand out potentially, who fits with the model of what Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell are looking for. Also, we'll get a sense of what John Morton likes in a player, as well as Calvin Shepard, if we get an opportunity to speak with them. But a big name did emerge, but not on the defense, which is interesting because whenever you bring up free agency, people indicate, look, focus on the defense. But there is a list of offensive players that will be available that the Lions could look to upgrade. And I think most people realize, okay, the wide receivers are decent, but you could bring in competition at wide receiver 3 and some depth. Maybe you go out there and upgrade from Tim Patrick, but I do think that there's an opportunity for him to continue to work with the Detroit Lions. But you recognize that, okay, depth along the offensive line is key, but there is a big name potential free agent out there. What was your reaction when you start seeing guys like Trey Smith from the Chiefs, who I understand. Look, man, he did not give up a sack. He's good against the run. You could do a lot of things with him. He was integral in the Chiefs, when they did have a solid run game. But I know people will say, well, look at the last game. He was pretty much, part of the reason that the offensive line struggled against a stout defensive line of the Eagles. But you got to also remember the context is the Chiefs didn't have really a solid run game. They were not able to establish the run, which makes the Chiefs one-dimensional. So the Eagles have the upper hand in terms of scheming, and that's where you can get all this pressure because there was no real threat of no threat of an explosive running play. Whereas the Lions, I think, you add talent to the offensive line, there's an opportunity there, but the cost is going to be very prohibitive. I think in adding a Trey Smith, over $20 million per season is expected of him. The Lions didn't make the push for the big name Dolphins offensive linemen last year. They have offensive linemen that they want to maybe draft or develop as well on the roster. So, what was your reaction to potentially, in your thoughts about maybe the Lions taking a big swing, maybe not on defensive line, but on the offensive line with Trey Smith?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Trey Smith is obviously a very good player. He's like a consensus top five, in some areas top two free agent when you look across the different media outlets that kind of have put together their rankings. And so Trey Smith, there's a lot to like about the potential fit because the Lions do have one of the best offensive lines in the league. And when you add a player like that, I don't think there's a conversation. I think you start talking about the fact that they are the best in the league. And unfortunately, I don't think that's an investment the Lions should necessarily feel like they have to make because at the end of the day, Graham Glasgow, yes, he took a step back in 2024, but the overall body of work with him suggests that in some way, shape, or form, he's going to contribute in a big way. And whether that's simply serving as a depth piece who can step up anytime somebody along the interior gets banged up and you can just throw a starting caliber talent in there like Graham Glasgow, then that's valuable in itself. The other thing you have to keep an eye on is Christian Mahogany, who in I think it was 5 total appearances, 2 starts on the offensive line, looked like he was ready to go. And obviously, you have your concerns about whether or not he can hold that up over a longer stretch in a period of time, obviously with only 2 starts. But at the end of the day, his physicality matches up. And he seemed ready for the moment when he got that start in the postseason against the Commanders. So he's one that with a full offseason, remember, he didn't get a chance to participate in training camp last year because he was out dealing with mono, and he was on the NFI list for the first handful of games in 2024 as a rookie. So I think with Mahogany, you have a guy talking about potential to be a high caliber contributor in 2025, simply based on the fact that he's going to get the full offseason. Assuming nothing goes wrong in terms of injuries, like this is a guy who's going to get a huge year of development in the offseason and then get a chance to go out and contribute in 2025. And then Kevin Zeitler, if Kevin Zeitler wants to come back, there's a short-term contract just waiting for him, in my opinion. I think he's a guy that the Lions should prioritize if he has the desire to come back. I know he's getting up there in years and he's been in the league for a long time, but at the end of the day, he was really good for the Lions last year. And yes, he missed a couple of games, but they were kind of isolated instances, and you didn't see any long stretches where he was absent from games due to injury. He's pretty durable. He's been durable throughout his career. And if he wants to run it back for another year or two, I think the Lions should definitely invest in that. So yes, Trey Smith is a very good player, but I think the Lions should prioritize their internal options just based on the fact that they have what it takes to perform at a high level, and they've performed at a high level for the last several years up front. And I don't think that they necessarily need to go out and get a big name free agent. Would it be great? Yes. Do I think it's necessary? No, I do not.
Okay. And it's one of those deals where you're always looking to upgrade. And so this portion of the podcast, we'll just talk about a little more, maybe more realistic free agent options. And so you kind of get a sense that, the Lions definitely look to teams that they've played against that had success against them and good players, but maybe not so much that are going to cost you north of 15 million per year, because I think that might that offers those kind of offers. And Brad Holmes, remember, always says that Derek Barnes, Ifatu Melifonwu, Carlton Davis, their own free agents are still considered free agents that they're going to bid on. And I think that the opportunities are there to make offers. And we'll talk about our early predictions regarding which key free agents may return or may not. But is there a list of names or anyone in particular that you think the Lions could target affordably? I just look at, maybe a mid-tier price. You maybe look at Byron Murphy of the Vikings. He signed a 2-year, $17.5 million contract with the Vikings. He had 6 interceptions last year. So you recognize, okay, there's some talent there. There could be an upgrade for the Detroit Lions. I also, again, sticking with the Vikings, I know maybe will be a little bit more costly. Cam Robinson, I think, was a nice addition for them that maybe you can, if you start to decide, if you make a surprise move along the offensive line, adding weapons there. But there are a lot of players, a handful of players that you think, okay, could do some things that could have some success. I know that Amik Robertson is a great slot defender, could move to the outside as well. But Mike Hilton from the Bengals, I think, acclimated well. He's turning 31, right around the time. That's a player that typically the Lions maybe start to at least evaluate. And I think he's going to draw a lot of interest. But I'm curious in regards to players that maybe you see or target that could be interesting for the Detroit Lions. Um, who do you think potentially has a chance? And a name to pay attention to that people see has a good pressure rate is Edge Baron Browning from the Cardinals. He's a name that I saw when you look at, the Broncos trading, making moves. They traded Browning at the deadline. He's a player that has a decent pressure rate, and he's up like not among the elite, but kind of in that mix. That's the Lions also at the same time. I understand the clear elite talent that they look for, but at the same time, there's also their willingness for them to look for more affordable players that could be available too. So if they're not going to go after the big names, maybe pay attention to Baron Browning from the Cardinals, who has a chance as well. Is there any players that you highlighted that said, hey, maybe fits the mold of coming off of an injury, more affordable, maybe a young player that also played well against the Lions? Because those are kind of the players that definitely catch the attention of Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell.
Yeah, absolutely. And one guy that I think that checks a lot of the boxes that you just mentioned is Dennis Gardeck from the Arizona Cardinals. Coming off of an injury, he played in 7 games in 2024. You might remember the Lions played against the Cardinals in Week 3, and Gardeck had an interception in that game, along with 4 combined tackles and 1 tackle for loss. This is a guy who may be up there in years. He's 30 years old, so he'll be 31 next season. He's been with the Cardinals his whole career, and injuries have kind of battered him around. He's never had anything super significant as far as absences go. He's played in at least 14 games in every year before 2024 when he only played in 7 games. But the sack totals are interesting. He's got 17 in his career, and he's more of an outside linebacker, like that Derek Barnes type of hybrid role. And so when I got to thinking about this, it's like, well, if the Lions get priced out on Derek Barnes, why would you not take a chance on somebody who maybe a little bit older, but does offer a lot of the same capabilities as far as his ability to play that kind of Sam linebacker type role? I don't know if that's necessarily how they defined it over there in Arizona, but he does have that similar ability to play the run really well and then get after the quarterback in spurts. And the way he's been categorized by Pro Football Focus is he's an underrated designated pass rusher. So doesn't necessarily get the love that he may deserve based on how well he's performed. But I think that Dennis Gardeck is one that's very interesting. If you want to go a little bit older, you could maybe take a swing on Matt Judon at a low type of contract to see if he's got anything left in the tank. I know he kind of underwhelmed this year for Atlanta after being acquired in that trade. But Matt Judon is still Matt Judon, and the body of work speaks for itself. And then another guy, obviously, when you talk about edges, and this guy's been kind of brought up in a bunch of different conversations over the last several years, is Josh Uche, who got traded to the Kansas City Chiefs after re-upping with the New England Patriots. And Uche, kind of that high ceiling, but also, the floor is kind of low. And so what kind of production are you going to get with Josh Uche? And I think a team will definitely take a chance on him in 2025. Whether or not that's the Lions, I don't know. I don't know that his rush style necessarily fits what the Lions are trying to do defensively, but he's an intriguing talent for sure, and I think that's one other guy you need to keep an eye on. So, yeah, there's a lot of different options that the Lions could consider within this free agency class, and not all these names are going to be the ones you throw on billboards and guys that are going to be the people that bring fans out necessarily in droves, but I think that there's some talent that could get overlooked And that's kind of where the Lions thrive is in the margins. So I'm really excited to see how Brad Holmes approaches this free agency in 2025.
Yeah, and it's kind of one of those deals where, you know, impact is key, but at the same token, there's a lot of variables and tangibles that the Lions look for in terms of fit, being gritty, being able to bounce back. Hopefully, they target players with a little more health luck that coming in, that are coming off of seasons that are potentially impactful, kind of ascending. So I'm hoping that they target players, 27 to 31 that have the ability, that are hungry, that are players that they can rely upon, especially going into an NFC that's getting ever so tough. Within your own divisions, getting tougher, everybody upgraded. I do think that the Commanders and Eagles are the class, as well as the Lions. And then you look at the division, the Bears, Vikings, Packers, all doing things and making moves and decisions to battle each other and try to match wits with each other. Good coaching staffs, and now developing quarterbacks as well. The key decision for the Vikings will be who's going to be under center. It could be J.J. McCarthy. They could make a splash, could go back to Sam Darnold. So it's going to be ever so tough every year to go up and climb and keep trying to reach the mountaintop. So for the Lions, I'm curious as we keep digging and learning. It's interesting. You and I both look to the Cardinals. I think because it's an NFC squad that's kind of competitive and has some moves as well. And looking at the division as well for players. But we'll keep targeting players as free agency hits. Now we're kind of looking more at the draft as we've looked at combine players to watch. But let's turn our attention to the Lions' own free agents, because losing some of those players, I think, would be detrimental. And I do think one is going to depart. I don't think that you're going to sign everybody. So let's just start with, and we'll dig deeper with the other names maybe in a later time, but let's look at some of the starters, some key starters. We're not going to do all of them with our time window here today, but we'll look at some key ones. I think the player that's going to be the player that you're going to have to compete with other teams for the most is starter Carlton Davis. I think he's ranked up there. People like press man coverage, his versatility, and I think that the Jets probably right now have made, legally made strides to let them know. And I mean, it's pretty clear Aaron Glenn is going to like Carlton Davis. There's going to be a bid. His salary is going to go over 14 million, could be up there in the 16, 17 million dollar range. I think he departs. I think he knows that there's potentially an opportunity for the Lions to go younger in the draft or in free agency at a more affordable cost. I do think he'll be a priority, but in my early prediction would be on Carlton Davis, he's out.
Oh, me too. Yeah, I don't know if we want to do this like speed round, but
Yeah, yeah.
yep. I think Carlton Davis wears a different uniform in 2025. I think that while he was good for the Lions, I think that like you mentioned, the Jets I think are a prime candidate. I've seen the Jaguars get floated around as well. So yeah, I just think his value is still too high, and the Lions will end up going younger, and I think that could be a position they target in the draft early on.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at it and you say, man, that price is going to be potentially up there. And maybe they allocate the funds most to him, but you have other players that you may want to keep. The next one I think stays, but also gets bids. I do think that Aaron Glenn will make a play for Derek Barnes, but I think that the connection that Barnes has with Kelvin Shepard and his very close bond and brotherly relationship with Alex Anzalone should keep the Lions in the strong mix to have Derek Barnes return. I think a healthy Barnes, Malcolm Rodriguez, Jack Campbell, and Alex Anzalone presents nice options and flexibilities for the Lions to do a lot of things at the linebacker spot. So I think Derek Barnes stays.
Yeah, I think Barnes is a yes for me as well. I think the Lions should be able to find a solid middle ground between rewarding him financially for the growth that he has showed over his first 4 years in the NFL, while also kind of keeping it within the realm. And he's going to play a big role for the defense, especially with Kelvin Shepard taking over as coordinator now. And I'm sure they'll have different things for him to do. And to have somebody who has learned the scheme and can play that Sam linebacker position. I mean, let's face it, the Lions have tried to put a lot of different people in that position over the last couple of years. James Houston didn't work out. They tried it with Matthew Betts. He didn't end up making the roster. But Derek Barnes, for all these reasons, has stepped up and he's owned that role. And so I think the Lions should reward him.
Okay. And the player I think also will get attention from the Jets and maybe some other teams, but could have a chance to come back if affordable. And you did a potential contract offer. I think that you're very generous in your contract offers that you give to these Lions players. I saw the one you did for Marcus Davenport. We'll get to him in a minute, about north of $5 million.
Mm-hmm.
What did you allocate for Ifatu Melifonwu? Because I could even argue you can go lower because of the fact that he's a player that's injured. He's a good player, but unfortunately not available. But I do think he's got a relationship with Aaron Glenn. Aaron Glenn could maybe make the play to give him like a starting role and have an opportunity there with the Jets defense. And I think that maybe more than money, there's an opportunity where Aaron Glenn could sell and the organization could sell, hey, take a prove it deal here. And if you get highlighted, I will do what it takes to get you highlighted and paid, but you can't command much. So I do think that for Ifatu Melifonwu, I think it'd just be a mutual split to go somewhere where you could just play a little bit more. So my prediction's out on Ifatu.
See, this is the first one we're going to disagree on, and I think the reason for this is the Lions have under Brad Holmes historically been like these buy low type of people on injury, guys coming off of injuries. Ifatu Melifonwu, when he's been in the lineup, especially in 2023, and then we saw it in flashes in 2024, he's been really productive, and he brings a unique skill set with his ability to blitz, with his ability to line up within the front seven and play against the run. He's a tough player. Let's not forget that the first 2 years he was a corner and he kind of had to transition and learn a new position. And so there is some upside to keeping him, and I think the Lions can do so on a 1-year deal. I proposed $4.5 million with incentives based around playing time and performance. And if it doesn't work out and he gets injured again, then it's unfortunate. But then that would be kind of like the last straw. But I don't hate the idea of bringing Ifatu Melifonwu back on a prove it deal. And finding a spot where he can contribute, because the Lions do have one of the best safety duos in the league, Kirby Joseph, Brian Branch. They don't necessarily need Ifatu Melifonwu to be a deep safety, but he does bring that level of versatility that can help the defense. And he can help you win games with his ability to blitz. Let's face it, and get after the quarterback. The Lions have struggled to generate pass rush, but what he did for the team down the stretch in 2023 is something that I think the Lions were hoping they could unlock more out of in 2024, but he just wasn't available. So I think one more go around for Melifonwu is within reason. He certainly could get a bigger offer somewhere else, or a longer term deal. Maybe somebody's willing to throw him a 2-year contract. And I think in that situation, you would just wipe your hands and say congratulations and wish him the best of luck. But I think a 1-year, short-term, low base salary, but also a chance to build that up with incentives, I think is fair to him, most importantly, and it also gives you a chance, one more swing to try to get the most out of him moving forward.
Yeah, it's become pretty clear to me that the agents would love you. $4.5 million. It's
Salary cap's going up.
Half. I'm going 1 year, 2 million, take it or leave it. Incentives for 500K, 2.5 max for a player that has not been on the field. The agents would be like, we want to talk to Christian, please. John, can you just hang up, and we want to move this along, and we want to get most for our clients.
That cap is going up.
Yeah,
that's my answer.
Yeah. It sounds like a true agent out there talking. I think a player that we probably agree upon, I think that's fair. Tim Patrick should return. I think that he's got a chance now, healthy, that he can take a step forward as well, has the chemistry. I think it's a fair thing to say Tim Patrick has a good chance to return and acclimate and get better even here in Detroit.
Yeah, I think even if they draft a young wide receiver, and whether it's in the middle rounds or maybe you get a guy that you really like fall to you at 28, I still think there's a lot of value in bringing Tim Patrick back. He's an excellent leader from how it all appears. He's not afraid to do the little things such as run blocking. He seems to be just genuinely enjoying being in Detroit, and he was productive. He was plenty productive in his first year with the Lions. So I think there's a lot of value in bringing him back.
I think you and I may be in lockstep as well. Kevin Zeitler, I think, respectfully, you can go younger, more affordable, more experienced, even better if you go high priced. I think Kevin Zeitler has played his last down in Detroit. I think that Mahogany takes his role, and you need to count on the young players on your roster to develop, like a Coyote Awosika, Colby Sorsdahl. They got to take strides forward. And Giovanni Manu, there's a lot of depth there. And I do think that, thanks for the year that you did of service. But at this time, you got to go younger. I hope that Mahogany can take that right guard spot and move it forward and be athletic and continue the strides that he had toward the second half of the season. I'm out on Zeitler. I think he's not going to return in 25.
See, I tend to disagree just because I like what Zeitler brought to the table last year. And I think his career track record shows that he's durable. And I think there's no harm in bringing him in for training camp. And if you get into training camp and he's just lost a step, and for whatever reason he just doesn't have it, then you can cut ties in August or September. I think that there's a lot of value in bringing him back to the younger players. I think that by bringing Zeitler back, that gives the young guys like Mahogany and Manu and Awosika, that gives them all somebody to go after and compete with. And I think that that's awesome. And if Zeitler shows up to training camp and he's still got it, then you've got another stud right guard next to Penei Sewell, and your right side of the line is locked down. So I think a 1 year deal for Kevin Zeitler is perfectly fair. Maybe you bump up the pay a little bit from last year because he did perform well. And then, yeah, I mean, maybe he finds a different landing spot. And if that's the case, then good for him. Congratulations. But I think that there's a lot of value in bringing Zeitler back.
Okay, and then our final two predictions for starters that are free agents, and we'll look at more like the interior of the defensive line, like John Kaminsky, Kyle Pecco, Neiman's. We'll look at those players a little bit later down the road in a couple of weeks after the combine, after things shake out, after we get more of a sense of who's available out there, who shines at the combine. But just in looking at the starters we're highlighting today, I think the two toughest decisions that could be both contentious in regards to contract and in regards to playing time and fit role. That could be some tough decisions made with a new defensive line coach, new defensive coordinator. Let's start with Marcus Davenport. I think that's a tough decision to evaluate because he's got something there that the Lions liked. Clearly, they went out and felt like, okay, Aaron Glenn and the defense would benefit from what he brings to the table. Now, you gave a contract, I think, north of $5 million, 5.5. And I think that's maybe a little bit high there as well. I would go 1 year, 3 million most with a lot of incentives. But I think that for depth, if you've targeted him, if you go low and you have an opportunity to get him affordably, you can't have really too many depth pieces along the defensive line. I think that he showcased a little bit of spark when he was here, but unfortunately, the problem is that there's a very big risk to put him as a roster spot as opposed to a younger player because of his extreme. But last year's injury was a fluke injury. It wasn't one of those deals that was degenerative. It was just he got hit in the right spot and gone for the year. And the upper arm injury and the injury that he suffered was a football playing injury that could happen to anybody. So it wasn't as a result of the lingering issues that he's had in the past. And I do think that if he spent a year in your meetings rooms and spent time with the coaches, if it's affordable, no more than $2.5, $3 million, I would say yes, but I'd be willing to do it. But my prediction right now is no. But I think there's wiggle room there to potentially make a deal if affordable. At your rate, I'm going heck no. If that's what the agent says, if the agent and Christian says that's the number, I'm like, see ya. Sorry, that's not the number.
Yeah, I mean, look, with Davenport, the interesting part is he's got the long trajectory of injuries, and so it makes it very tough to project. I mean, he hasn't played a full season, and when you talk about the fact that Davenport's been in this league a while, like I think that the Lions, like I said, 5.5 million is the highest I'm going. I could be talked into lower, but I'm not getting talked into higher. And so if there's a team out there that does see a little bit more in him, then that's one that the Lions are going to have to part ways with. But I think that there is a good point there that you made, and it's the fact that there's something there with him, and he just hasn't been able to unlock it due to a various number of injuries, and fluky things, and we did see the Lions take another chance on Emmanuel Mosley last year after his injury in 2023 limited him to just one game. They did take another chance on him, and it didn't end up working out. So again, Davenport is an interesting one because I still think he's got more left in the tank. It's just a matter of whether or not he can stay healthy. I do not believe the Lions should plan around having Marcus Davenport, and if they make this move, then they say, "Oh, we're good at the edge now because we have Hutchinson and Davenport." I still think you have to invest younger, and whether or not they view Davenport as a piece that can help them in 2025, I think he could be a leader for the room. But at the end of the day, the best ability is availability. And, I don't think it's the same argument as Melifonwu because Melifonwu has been in the league 4 years and he's had a couple of different things, whereas Davenport has a little bit of a longer runway where injuries have consistently been a theme. And so I think that with Davenport, there's not as much upside to keeping him. And so, I mean, I'm putting out there the take it or leave it deal. And if he doesn't take it, then he doesn't take it. So I'm 50-50 on Davenport. Right now I lean no, but I certainly think there's a future where he could end up back in Detroit for 2025.
And then a tough decision, I think, is Levi Onwuzurike because it's one of those deals where the potential was there. That's why they invested a higher draft pick in him. But, injuries derailed the first part of his return. And now you've only had this one season of productivity to kind of evaluate. Do you foreshadow that he's going to be a player that could develop? If you do, then you make him an offer. But I do think that if you're talking 15 and north of $20 million for a player, I think his production doesn't justify paying him that much. So I do think a team will take a chance on him. I think teams look at it and say, okay, we can build from this 1 year. And so I think Levi Onwuzurike understands that there's an opportunity to earn a hefty contract. I think he's going to bring an offer to the Lions, and I don't think they're going to match it. So I think that it's going to be a cost reason. I think that he is a player worth developing. I think that he's gritty. He's a player that showcased that he wanted to get better and be consistent and be somebody that could pressure the quarterback. I thought he had an okay season, but in terms of football, I think you could upgrade at that spot along the interior with a deep defensive tackle class, and you could find a lot of defensive linemen that can really stop the run, be consistent pass rushers, stay healthy in this draft and in free agency. So in my opinion, it's a no, but just based on the fact that he's probably going to get a nice, healthy contract offer that's going to make it difficult. One of those tougher decisions that Brad Holmes has to face, but I wouldn't be frustrated. I don't think you've done that yet. Maybe we'll have that soon this week on Lions on SI. What kind of contract for Levi could be out there for him? But would you bring back Levi Onwuzurike? My early predictions, no.
Yeah, so for my prediction for him, I put it as 3 years and 42 million, which
Mm.
I do think is high. But at the end of the day, the defensive tackle market is just taking off, and there was a lot of buzz about Onwuzurike, especially during training camp, about the type of player he could be. And you heard his teammates talk about, oh, this is the next $20 million defensive tackle, and this is a guy who can really bring it. And I don't think he gets 20 million, but I don't think 15 is out of the realm of possibility. Now, if I'm Detroit, am I giving him 15 million? No, I'm not. I went 14. So that would be the highest I go. You get anywhere north of 14, that's when I start to say, no, probably not. So Onwuzurike, really good player, really good potential. But I think that there's going to be a team out there that likes him a little bit more than the Lions do. And that's not to say the Lions don't like Levi Onwuzurike, but I do think that with the value of the defensive line being what it is in 2025, in the market that some of these defensive tackles are demanding in terms of average annual value, I think Onwuzurike there's a payday out there for him. I just don't necessarily think it comes from the Lions, and it could come from his former boss, Aaron Glenn, with the New York Jets, as we've mentioned earlier with a couple of these other guys. So yeah, Onwuzurike, good player, but you're right. I do think the Lions could find something in this draft that kind of brings a little bit more juice, and I think that especially, and I wrote about it this morning, Kenneth Grant and this interior defensive line group of pass rushers is incredible. These guys are athletic at the top end of the board. They're fast, they're explosive, and I think that there's going to be an option there for the Lions, whether it's at 28, whether somebody slips to the second round. But this is one of your draft and develop situations, I think, where Onwuzurike moves on and you find his replacement through the draft and develop him.
Okay. Yeah, no, good. I liked our early thoughts in regards to free agency. Is going to be very interesting in March when it goes down. The 10th through the 12th. The week of my birthday is free agency time. So it's like, oh man, I got to celebrate either before or after or during. It's always fun to cover the NFL, but the timing of the schedule doesn't suit me personally, but it's going to be great because we'll be invested. Make sure to check in with Lions on SI as we bring more predictions, podcasts, evaluations regarding who comes in, who leaves, the impact, the grades, all that available at Lions on SI. All right, next week will be the combine. You started your profiles. You started with the defense first, which is probably smart and wise because that's the clear need for the Detroit Lions. You've looked at edges. Clearly, there's a lot of good ones, a deep class. You talked about the defensive tackles. You looked at cornerbacks as well. What are you looking at in terms of this combine? Where are you seeing the depth? Where can the Detroit Lions get better? Because I do think that the combine is great for measurables. But now look, it's one of those deals where we'll have the coverage, but Brad Holmes says that, yeah, the numbers are great to document, but he definitely looks at the film. But the thing that's most key about the combine is starting next Monday, the players will talk to the Lions. They'll start to have those. We'll start to bring you those information as who's talking to the Lions. And that's where the coaches can get their first glimpse of who fits in regards to the intangibles. What do they look like in terms of their passion for the game? Can they handle ups and downs? Can they handle the bombardment of social media requests? Can they handle when Lions on SI puts out 5, 6 requests and says, hey, come on our podcast? What are they going to say? What are they going to try and talk about? So that's one of those areas as well. But I think defensively, and maybe we'll do a more comprehensive preview next week before the combine, as next Monday we'll be traveling out there. I think that what you can see is for a team that needs offensive line depth and defensive line depth, there's a lot of good players
Mhm.
that they can get in the early rounds and in the later rounds too from the trenches. And I think that's a good sign in our early talk about the combine for the Lions. What are you looking for? Who are some players that you're watching and taking a look at?
Yeah, so I mean, I've got last year's draft pulled up just because this is amazing to me. And the first defensive player in last year's draft was selected 15th overall. This year, the first player in the draft might be a defensive player with Penn State's Abdul Carter. And so as I've been looking through these different positions, whether it's the edge, the cornerbacks, and the defensive tackles are the three that I've gotten through to this point. What I'm seeing is a lot of depth, particularly up front, with some of these guys who are just unbelievably athletic for their size. I mean, I mentioned Kenneth Grant earlier. That's somebody who obviously living in the state of Michigan, the Michigan games are always on. So that's somebody I've gotten a lot of exposure to just watching football on Saturdays. And the one thing that stands out to me about him is number one, he flies off the ball, but number two, he plays with a relentless motor and just chases down. I mean, we've all seen the clip of him chasing down the Penn State running back from despite the running back getting like a 15-yard head start and Grant runs him down and makes the play. But that's the kind of stuff that you can see multiple times if you turn on his tape. I mean, I really like Kenneth Grant. Another interesting one to me, Darius Alexander, small school product. Shout out to the MAC. As a MAC grad myself, watching him at Toledo, it's been interesting to follow along with his journey as well. Sounds like he had a pretty good Senior Bowl, and now he gets the chance to go out and prove his athleticism at the combine. I really, really like Darius Alexander as well. When you talk about cornerbacks, there's a couple of different guys that are really interesting to me. Jahdae Barron. Matt Miller from ESPN made the comparison of him to Brian Branch, and I love that comparison. I think Jahdae Barron is a football player. And when I did my mock draft simulation a little bit ago, I picked him 28th overall, and I know there was some responses, oh, no, not another corner. Trust me, if you haven't watched this guy play, watch him play. He is so much fun to watch. He flies around. He makes big plays. He's really good with the ball in the air. And I think the top end of this cornerback class, you talk about him and Will Johnson, as well as some other guys in that mix. But I really like Barron. He's probably one of my favorite players in the class as we speak here in early February. I guess mid-February now ahead of the scouting combine. I really like Jahdae Barron. And then one other guy I'll mention from the interior defensive line that I really like is Walter Nolan. Walter Nolan was a guy that just in reviewing different film and things like that, just one guy that really popped out to me because of how quick he is off the ball, his first step, and how strong he is. I mean, I really like Walter Nolan. He's a guy that transferred from Texas A&M to Ole Miss this past year and had the best season of his collegiate career. So Walter Nolan's another guy where if the Lions decide, hey, Anzarike ends up leaving, we need some depth on the defensive line. A guy like Walter Nolan makes a ton of sense for them. And then before we switch gears, I'll give you an edge rusher. I know everybody wants edge rusher. One guy that I've got pulled up here that I think could get to the Lions, whether it's in the first round or the second round, is Mykel Williams. Mykel Williams is a guy that I really like. Probably not going to be available in the second round. And then I know a lot of the buzz is him climbing, but I would really love it if the Lions could either find a way to get up to Williams' spot wherever he's going to land, whether that's the late teens, early 20s, or he somehow slides down the board. Mykel Williams is a guy, plays with super heavy hands, physical at the point of contact, and can really get after the quarterback and heat him up with his speed rush as well. So Mykel Williams is another guy I really like. I just think that to summarize it all, there is a ton of different flavors with this defensive line group, but there's a ton of depth and there's really something for everybody out there. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of that as I get deeper into my reviews of different position groups. But there's a lot to like about this defensive line group. And so the more I see this, the more I want the Lions to kind of go in that direction, whether it's on the edge or the interior in the first round.
Okay, looking offensively, you know that there's talent. You looked at some players that potentially could be fits with some of the Lions' new coaches, wide receiver from Iowa State. You looked at quarterback from Texas. So, what are your thoughts offensively? I think they go offensive line early, potentially. I think there's so many good offensive linemen that you potentially could slot in there and have a lot of success. I know that everyone's looking at the defensive line, but there's depth there that you can get in the second round or even later. I know a lot of people are, really focusing in on defense, but there's a lot of good offensive linemen like Josh Simmons from Ohio State. He's making a lot of noise. You realize that Josh Connerly making a lot of noise out of Oregon. Who catches your attention in regards to offensive linemen and maybe some offensive weapons as well that could be available? As some of the mock drafts, and you can check out the mock draft roundups every Friday at Lions on SI as we organize and gather and we do our own mock drafts. There's a lot of good names that are being mocked to the Lions on the offensive side, most notably on the offensive line.
Yeah, so I think that Tyler Booker from Alabama is an interesting one. I've seen him in different mock drafts to the Lions. I think that if the Lions were to go early interior offensive line, that's a guy that makes a ton of sense. And then one other guy that I just recently kind of caught wind of, and obviously I've been familiar with this player, but you talk about playmakers and skill position guys. I think one guy to keep an eye on is Iowa State wide receiver Jaden Higgins. In looking into the different NFL prospects that have ties to the Lions' new coaches from the college ranks, I discovered Higgins and really got to figure out the type of player that he is. He's a big-bodied wideout. He's a very disciplined route runner. He's got a lot of different angles on the route tree and things like that. I think he could be a really solid pro. He's 6'3", 217 is what he's listed at. I really like his game a lot. And then you talk about a guy like Jalen Travis from Iowa State. A later round guy. Some people have varying opinions on him, but the consensus is kind of day 3. I know that he's a little bit further down the board, but I really like his physical measurables. I think that he's another guy that could almost be a lottery pick in terms of just see what you can get out of him. The Lions have that infrastructure up front to where he doesn't have to go out there and play right away, especially at the tackle position with Decker and Sewell. But just a guy who you can bring in and see if you can unlock what he's got. Big kid, huge frame, moves well. He's a good pass protector. He just needs to fine-tune the run game aspects of his game. So those are some guys that I'm really interested in terms of offensively. You talk about other wide receivers, guys like Emeka Egbuka, who just kind of his play style I really like. I'm excited to watch him at the combine. Is he going to run the fastest 40-yard dash? I don't think so, but he's going to be somebody who really projects as a reliable pro. Obviously, Ohio State has an awesome lineage of wide receivers over the last several years. And then, I don't know if you want to talk quarterbacks.
Let's hold off, but
okay.
As we see what they do. But yeah, because we'll talk about backups and quarterbacks, but let's see what they do. And maybe in our extensive preview, as we'll probably talk later this week as well, breaking it all down.
I gotcha. Yeah, no, I didn't. That's why I asked. I didn't know if we wanted to get into that, but I do have some opinions.
Okay, no, very good. Early combine look. We'll probably come back later on this week with some more information. Make sure you check your podcast feed, subscribe, so when a new podcast drops, you'll have it right away in your phone and ready to go. And also, too, the hub of the operation at Detroit Podcast, where we post our videos. And now you can find Detroit Lions on SI on YouTube, where we take the clips and post them all there of all the interviews, the debates, the discussions as we grow. Thank you for the early positive response. We appreciate the subscribers that, just anywhere that you want Detroit Lions content, just type in Detroit Lions on SI and the videos, insider analysis, debates, discussions, predictions, opinions, everything. Everything at all, speculation, everything, columns, everything that you would want if you're a fan of the Detroit Lions for FREE free. Christian, that was good. Good recap. Good start to the week. We'll come back probably later on this week with another episode, diving deeper into the combine, different positions, linebackers, potential, maybe skill players at wide receiver that we really like that potentially could challenge Tim Patrick and Jamison Williams. And we'll see about what this combine could bring for the Detroit Lions. So make sure, everybody, you like and subscribe. Find the Lions Lone Wolves podcast everywhere that you listen to the Detroit Lions, everywhere you listen to Detroit Lions podcast. And visit every single day, si.com/NFL/Lions.